So, to address the elephant that has been in the room for over a year now, Marth wasn't the only character introduced in Super Smash Bros. Melee. The other was a fiery, red-headed pretty boy named Roy, whose in-game trophy description went a little something like this. The son of the Lord of Foray Principality, Roy was studying in Ostia when the Kingdom of Bern invaded the League of Lycia. His father fell ill at this time, so Roy assumed leadership of Foray's armies. After his fateful meeting with the Princess Guinevere, his destiny became inextricably linked with the fates of the entire continent. So, whereas Marth would become a staple of the Smash series, representing the Fire Emblem series as a whole, Roy's appearance in future Smash games was a little less consistent. He was omitted completely from Brawl in favour of Ike, and would eventually reappear in Smash 4 as a DLC character. The reason for this is that Roy's inclusion in Melee was intended to get Japanese fans excited for an upcoming release, Roy's very own entry in the Fire Emblem series, Fire Emblem Binding Blades. This Japan-exclusive title for the Game Boy Advance was something of a reboot of the Fire Emblem series. It followed a lot of cues from Marth's adventure, so much so that I'd consider it a spiritual successor. But it added in just a couple of new features to give it a little edge, features that would go on to become staples themselves. So, having played the Binding Blade with a fan-made translation patch, what are my prevailing thoughts on it? Well, it's just like the original. Like, beat for beat. You have the main protagonist, who is a young noble, their mentor, who seems strong at first, but actually makes the game harder if you depend on them, a pair of loyal horse knights with an offensive red and a defensive green motif, a mercenary leader who owns bones, a cleric who is rescued from the enemy, an edgelord swordsman who needs to be recruited from the enemy team, and no, I'm not reusing my old script, shut up! And instead of using Marth's Sword of Light to defeat a dark dragon at the end of the game, here you're expected to use Roy's Sword of Fire to defeat a dark dragon. Same but different, I guess. So, what really separates this game from the original? Well, point the first, Roy goddamn sucks. Not as a character, mind, he's just kind of milquetoast in that regard, but as a unit, Roy is a human train wreck. His starting stats and development potential are pathetic. The story takes way too long to promote him, which gives you very little time to boost his mediocre stats. He can barely hold his own against any number of units. Even axe wielders, who he's supposed to be effective against, can lay waste to him. Now, from a plot and gameplay perspective, I get why Roy is trash. The guy was still in training when war broke out, and he ends up carried by his friends and followers. This is kind of part of the game too. You're supposed to make use of Roy's armies to give him the victory. All I'm saying is that it can be a little frustrating when the game's hero, upon whom everybody depends and who grants you an immediate game over upon their death, is about as durable as a wet paper bag. So, to all of the Melee players curious as to why Roy is so much worse than Marth, you now have your answer. Getting back on track though, Roy's one redeeming feature is that he grants decent support bonuses, which, I know that's jargon, but it takes us neatly to point number 2. The Binding Blade was the first game in the Fire Emblem series to introduce the beloved support mechanic. By keeping compatible units close by one another, you can prompt up to 3 unique conversations between them. Not only do these conversations allow for a wealth of character development, but if you bond your characters enough, they'll eventually become BFFs or even OTPs. By matchmaking units and having them fall in love, you can grant them incredibly potent stat boosts when they stick close by one another, which is really helpful once you hit the endgame's brutal difficulty spike. And yes, I ship Roy and Lilina. I know it's obvious, but these two are so cute together. So the final feature that gives this game its own identity is kinda backhanded, if I'm honest with you. If you seek this game out yourself, I would suggest playing with an FAQ on hand, because there are a number of secret conditions in Binding Blade that allow you to access bonus chapters and acquire divine weapons. This is awesome because it allows you to turn most any unit into a powerhouse if they have the weapon proficiency required to wield one of these game breakers. However, it also sucks because if you miss a single one of the divine weapons, you are locked out of the end game and the true ending, bringing the game to an abrupt end once you take down the corrupted King of Burn. Naturally, I didn't know this during my first playthrough and it kind of soured it for me, but you know what? Hey, I had a good enough time to warrant that second run, so good on you, Roy, even if you can't fight for toffee. Now, this may be a little hard to wrap your head around, but stay with me. The next Fire Emblem game released, and the 7th installment in the series overall, was Fire Emblem The Blazing Blade for the Game Boy Advance, and it is a prequel to The Binding Blade, so 7 comes before 6. But as far as us Westerners are concerned, this is the first game in the series, because it's the first game that was localized for us, so as far as we know, it's just Fire Emblem. For us, it's just called Fire Emblem. Except that doesn't work in any regard, because we know Roy exists through Smash Bros, so it doesn't take a genius to figure out that we missed out on the Binding Blade. Nintendo, why do you do these things?
The drums of war are beating. No man can be trusted.
What happened to Dorcas?
I put poison in his mutton.
Anyways, this game is a little more experimental than previous installments, with it starting by asking your personal details. You, the player, are written into the game's narrative as a tactician, with your default name being Mark. You don't get to fight, mind, that doesn't come into play until the DS games, but hey, at least the characters can turn and start talking to you during conversation. And, that's actually kinda creepy. The Binding Blade is split into 3 smaller campaigns, the first being a tutorial, the second being the real meat of the game, and the last one, which is unlocked upon the game's completion, being a new game plus of sorts, which offers a slightly increased difficulty curve. All 3 of these campaigns follow the perspective of a central character. The first is Lyn, a travelling swordswoman. The second is Eliwood, Roy's far more competent father. And the last is Hector, burly beefcake, father of Lilina, and, spoiler warning, doomed to be assassinated in the sequel. Ain't that upsetting? That's a straight up doomed campaign right there. Regardless, these 3 lords are powerhouses. They can breeze through most of the game themselves, which makes them the antithesis to Roy, especially when you get all 3 of them together. And regarding them being the parents of characters from The Binding Blade, they aren't the only examples of this. Most of the female characters in Blazing Blade can be paired with Eliwood and become Roy's canonical mother, and those who can't pair with Eliwood can be paired with their own selection of suitors in order to become the mothers of other Binding Blade characters. The matchmaking of Blazing Blade actually contributes to the world building, and I kind of love that. It's a really nice attention to detail, which I think helped to inspire the parent and child mechanic in Fire Emblem Awakening. And that's not to mention the old geezers from Binding Blade, who appear in this game as their younger selves, including Binding Blade's final boss, who you have to protect at one point.
Snake, what have you done? You changed the future. You've created a time paradox.
Again, it's weird to get so fixated on this, but it's my favourite thing about Blazing Blade. And it's something that, as a Westerner, it should have gone over my head, because until the fan patch came out, we had no access to Binding Blade. Now, if you'll allow me to put on my hat of negativity, my least favourite thing about Blazing Blade are the tutorials. During your first playthrough, you are forced into a super patronising, hand-holding, and in one agonising case, character nerfing tutorial, which can't be opted out of. If this is your first ever Fire Emblem, then fine, I can see the appeal of this. It makes this a fantastic entry point into the series, but sweet lord, why wasn't this optional? I know how to use items, Fire Emblem. I've been playing this series for over 10 years now. Whenever I revisit this game, I do so with a completed save file downloaded from the internet, because that's the only way for me to, actually play the game for myself. But with that glaring issue aside, this is a pretty rad Fire Emblem game, and I'd go so far as to say it's the first entry in the series with a really engaging plot, carried by its creative and unique characters. One such character being Dorcas.
What happened to Dorcas?
I put poison in his mutton.
Dorcas is a gem of a character. To some, he could be seen as a generic fighter, but there's so much more to him than that. He's a gentle giant wielding a mighty axe and fighting to support his loving wife Natalie, to whom he is unbelievably devoted. Other notable characters include Dorcas and Dorcas, a pair of twins who are revealed to be half-dragon, and who function as bards, allowing characters to take multiple turns. And that's not even mentioning the main antagonist, Dorcas, a cruel puppet master who seeks to resurrect the Dorcases. But with the help of the legendary hero Dorcas, as well as the combined efforts of your three heroes, Dorcas, Dorcas and Dorcas, and their varied entourage, you can put a stop to Dorcas and save the continent of Dorcas from the threat of poisoned mutton.
What happened to Dorcas?
So that's Dorcas Emblem, the Blazing Dork. I highly recommend checking this game out, especially if you're new to the Dorcas Emblem series, but do keep in mind that it's far from the best installment in the franchise. In fact, both of these games were about reinvention and setting the foundation for future games. And don't you worry, we'll be checking those out soon. Thanks for watching, everyone. Here's hoping 2018 isn't a total mess. If you want to see more content from me, then please consider dropping a quid or two into my Patreon. Money is tight right now, and I would highly appreciate that. This has been Dorcas Dork Dorcas. See you later, everyone.